Welcome to the Branch Church Online. Happy Mother's Day. Today I brought my mom to give you some announcements.
Thanks, Evie. Next week, we're going to be live streaming from our new building in New Philly, and we invite you all to join us at 10 a.m. for that. This month, we're doing a digital forum where you can ask the pastors any questions you may have. So we would ask that you just send those questions via text or email to the church. And lastly, just want to encourage everyone to be checking in with your Triangle members and just connecting with them throughout the rest of this month.
Today we're going to be talking about women of the faith from the Bible. But first, let's sing a song.
Worthy Hey, good morning. Great to be with you this morning, even though it's a virtual service again this morning. And it's Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to my own mom, who's still living. And I'm so blessed to have my mother still living. And I'm blessed to have my dear wife, Sharon, here with me this morning. And we are going to talk about a mother in the Old Testament. Sharon and I have raised 3 children. Been a blessing. Children are a blessing, aren't they?
They are, yes. Yes. In fact, there's a verse in Psalm 127 that says that very thing. It says, sons are a heritage from the Lord, children a reward from him. And we have certainly found that true in our family. We're just very thankful that God gave us our 3 children.
Yeah, and we've had the blessing now of graduating to being grandparents.
Yes.
And that's the joy as well. Been a joy to launch our children into adulthood, to live lives that really glorify the Lord, and then watch them raise children. Well, this morning for Mother's Day, we want to look at a mother in the Old Testament, a very prominent man, but most of us probably don't know his mother's name. The man is Moses. Moses, of course, was used by God to deliver the Israelites from Egypt. And his mother was a woman by the name of Jochebed. We don't read much about her in the Bible, in fact, very little, but we know that she was a mother of influence. And let me just kind of set the scene a little bit from Exodus chapter 1 and 2. In Exodus chapter 1 and 2, we learn that the Israelites had increased greatly in number. The king that was favorable to the Israelites when Joseph was still alive had died. In fact, Joseph had died. That whole generation had passed away. A new generation comes along of leadership in Egypt. The Israelites are growing exponentially almost in population. In fact, by the time of the Exodus, there may have been as many as 1 million people, according to historians. And so the king of Egypt issues an edict that essentially says, you have to commit infanticide. You have to murder boys, sons. If it's a girl, let her live. If it's a boy, throw him into the Nile River and drown him. And so when we think about the mother of Moses, Jochebed, she is called of God to bear a son and bear children. She has more than one child, by the way, and we'll talk about that later. But she's called to bear a child at a time of incredible persecution and stress. Now, Sharon, you've been pregnant 3 times. You know the stress just of pregnancy. What about this added stress of, wow, talk about that a little bit.
Oh, that would be so hard. Like you said, there's always some stress and anxiety with pregnancy, just the unknowns of how this is going to go and the health of yourself and this baby that you're waiting for. But in this time, to have that edict hanging over your head the entire time, I think would just be like a sword to the heart. Just a tremendous weight on you all the time. I can just imagine waking up in the morning and it's with you and just, how can I hide this pregnancy? What if it's a boy? Lord, please give us a girl. We don't know what Jochebed thought, but we kind of make those imaginations and think of how awful it would have been.
Yeah. Yeah, and strangely enough, we don't know much at all about her from the Old Testament, but the New Testament sheds some light on Jochebed and her husband. We don't even know his name, as far as I know. But in Acts chapter 7, verse 17, Stephen is making his defense before the Jewish authorities. And if you remember the context, he reviews Israel's history with them. Stephen, the first martyr. And in verse 17 of Acts chapter 7, Stephen says this, and it's pertinent to our discussion about Jochebed. he says, as the time drew near for God to fulfill his promise to Abraham, the number of our people in Egypt increased greatly. Then another king who knew nothing about Joseph became ruler of Egypt. He dealt treacherously with our people and oppressed our forefathers by forcing them to throw out their newborn babies so they would die. Can't think of anything more horrific than that. At that time, Moses was born. So that's the context of his birth. At that time, when they were throwing out newborn babies, Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months, he was cared for in his father's house. Then he was placed outside. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and in action. There's just 2 little phrases there that really stand out to me. One is, at that time. So it sets the time of Moses' birth and Jochebed giving birth to Moses when there was all this chaos and persecution. But it was a time that God had established. God had heard their cries, and he said, I'm going to deliver my people. And I'm raising up a man. Now, 80 years passed before that all happened, from the time Moses was born. But yet it was the time, and Jochebed was the woman that God had raised up for that purpose. And then it says, and Sharon, I want you to talk about this. It says that he was no ordinary child. What does that mean?
That's been the question that we've batted back and forth this week, wondering what that means. Some translations say beautiful or beautiful in God's sight. And we're not totally sure. I mean, in our thinking, every child is beautiful, especially our own.
Yes.
So it seems
Grandkids especially so, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that seems like an odd thing to say. But we tend to think that it was something that God laid on her heart, that there was something that was extraordinary about this baby, that God was going to use him in a special way.
Yeah, like there was a divine purpose on Moses' life, and God had somehow revealed that to Jochebed, that her son was destined for a special role in the life of God's people. Now, the last verse is in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11, of course, the great chapter of faith. So read verse 23 to us, dear.
By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict.
Wow, there's so much there. Just in that one sentence, there's so much there. And when we think of the king's edict, we think in our own context of civil disobedience. Maybe you've been tired of sitting at home and you're sneaking out and going to see people that maybe you shouldn't right now. But what they experienced in Egypt was nothing like that. This was a dictatorship. This was a ruthless leader that to be in rebellion against him was a dangerous thing. It meant your life. And so she was not afraid, the text says, of the king's edict. And that was why she's included in this chapter of faith, because she trusted God. So, Sharon and I put this together, and we came up with this statement about Jochebed, the mother of Moses. She was a creative, courageous woman of faith. A creative, courageous woman of faith. And Sharon, you came up with creative. How did you come up with that?
Well, as I read this, I thought, isn't it interesting that in a sense, she obeyed the king's edict, which was that they had to put the baby boy into the Nile River?
Yeah, you go back to Exodus for that, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And she did, but she made sure he was safe in his little basket. And I
Yeah.
thought, boy, that did take some creativity to come up with a solution. That
Yeah. Safe in his little ark.
right.
That's what
Yeah.
the word, it's the same word that's used in Genesis for ark. So he's safe in his own little ark. And she was very courageous. We don't know, because the Bible doesn't tell us how many Hebrew women actually maybe had an abortion somehow, or I can't fathom throwing away your child, but they may have not had a choice. But she was a courageous enough woman that she found a way to protect Moses, and God worked through her courage then, didn't he? He
Yes.
really did.
Yes.
And she was a woman of faith, just a woman of faith. We don't even see her name in Hebrews. They're only called Moses' parents. But we see them listed as heroes of the faith. And faith, we know, sees the invisible and does the impossible. And that's what they did, didn't they?
Yes.
So, as we wrap this up, Sharon, what do you want to say to the moms this morning? What are a couple of lessons from this?
Yeah. The first one is to be faithful. You have no idea of the eternal outcome and the fruit of your faithful parenting.
Yeah.
We thought about that because Jochebed probably never saw what God did through Moses. He was 80 by the time he led the children of Israel out of Egypt. And so we would assume that she had probably passed on by then and didn't get to see what God was going to do through her son.
Yeah. Being a mother is hard, isn't it?
Yes.
I remember when our children were young. What a journey it is, having young kids getting up in the middle of the night with your infant and feeding and diapers and nonstop, just work. And in the middle of all that, sometimes you lose sight of what's God going to do through this child.
Yeah.
And wow. The second thing I think we want to say to moms this morning is to be courageous. I think Jochebed's example is as a mother of courage. I love this part of her story. She was not afraid of the king's edict. She chose to obey God and not do what culture dictated. She allowed the word of God, not the prevailing culture, to dictate how she would raise her child, her son. And we know that there's so many voices telling us in our culture how we should raise our children and what we should do and how we should do it. But ultimately, the only voice that matters is God's and God's word. And so more than ever, friends, we want to raise courageous children that learn to go against the culture, to be lovers of Jesus, like Daniel and like Jochebed and like Joseph and like Joshua, who have the courage to stand for Jesus as the culture drifts farther and farther away from him. So we pray that this short little look at the life of Jochebed will be an encouragement to you. And we love all you mothers. Happy Mother's Day.
I appreciate that Mama got us baby books so that we can look at when we grow up.
What I appreciate most about my mom is she's always believed in me. She's always had my back, and that's helped me make it through some tough times and some struggles that I've had.
Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Just want you to know you are the best cook ever. My kids say that Grandma's food is always better than mine. Happy Mother's Day.
So what I appreciate about my mom is that she loves Jesus. She's very loving and caring. She's one of my best friends, and she makes all my favorite foods. And now she's the best grandma. So love you, Mom. Happy Mother's Day.
What I love about my mom is she's more patient than anyone I know.
Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Here are a few things I love about you. I love that you are funny and humorous. I like that you are a light to everyone you come across. You're caring, you go out of your way for everyone in need, and most of all, you are very strong. Love you. Happy Mother's Day.
Molly.
There are a lot of things that I appreciate about my mom, and several I didn't even realize until I became a mom myself. But what stands out to me the most is that she faithfully prays for me and my family.
She was a homeschooling mom of 6, and I never once heard her talk about how tired she was of being around us all the time. And I thank her so much for everything she did to pour into our lives.
Hey church, just want to say a thank you to my mom for everything she's done for me, and also to my wonderful wife Amy for being an amazing mother to our 2 sons. Happy Mother's Day. Thanks, babe.
Welcome. Today you can see I've brought my lovely wife and mother of our 2 children with me today to share with you guys. We're going to be looking at 1 Samuel chapter 1, the story of Hannah and Samuel. And Hannah was married to a guy named Elkanah. And more than likely, Hannah was his first wife, and he loved her dearly, but she was barren. It says the Lord has closed her womb. And having a lineage and having someone to pass down the family name was really, really important. And so Elkanah went out and got a second wife named Peninnah. I don't know how you would feel about that situation. Probably wouldn't go over too well.
Maybe not so well.
I don't think it would go over very well. But that's what happened, and so you can imagine there was this tension between the two. And in verse 6 of 1 Samuel chapter 1, it said, "And her rival used to provoke her grievously to irritate her, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Lord, she used to provoke her. Therefore Hannah wept and would not eat. And Elkanah her husband said to her, 'Hannah, why do you weep, and why do you not eat? And why is your heart sad? Am I not more to you than 10 sons?' After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Lord. She was deeply distressed and prayed to the Lord and wept bitterly. And she vowed a vow and said, 'O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your servant, and remember me, and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a son, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall touch his head.'" And we really love this story because it really connects to our story. And so why don't you share a little bit about our journey?
Yeah. Hannah's story really has been something that we've looked at. Whenever we first got married, it was our desire to have a family, to have kids, and just to, have that, I suppose, the lineage in a way, have those. Whenever we're old, I think about that. Well, I'd like to have kids that can help look after me, or we can go and do those family things, all those things. And so whenever we started to try and have kids, it just wasn't happening, and we tried out some testing and went through that whole process, and it took 3 or 4 years. And those 3 or 4 years were a journey. We went through the process of grieving, not knowing what it looked like, knowing that even in the midst of it, God's hand was upon us. But in that, knowing that his hand was upon us, we still didn't know the outcome. We really had to get to a place where we just trusted his peace, and we sought his peace to comfort us, to know that he was over it. So we kind of went through that process, and then we eventually were able to have kids. And so, it was a journey for sure.
Well, and as we journeyed through that, I think one of the places that God took us through that grief and through that pouring out and receiving his peace, we kind of came to the conclusion of, what if we can't have kids? And what are we going to do? And are we okay with that? And what were some of the conclusions that we came to at that point?
I think through that process, we kind of came to the point where we were, okay, do we adopt? Do we foster kids? Do we just take on other people's kids to disciple them, to let them be our family? we know that there's many people out there who can't have kids, and it's a hard thing. It's hard to go through. It's hard to, just be living in, I suppose. But know that even if you can't have kids, that doesn't mean that God's not blessing you. That's not what that is. It's knowing that He, I suppose, has good gifts for you. That was actually, for me, a big thing through this whole process that God taught me. I, for some reason, believed the lie that God gives good gifts. I did believe that, and I could see that in the world and with everybody that I interacted with, but I didn't believe that for myself personally. I really struggled
God gives
with
good
that.
gifts, but just not to me.
Yeah, it was just like, for some reason, I'm not good enough, I'm not whatever. And so the whole process for me has been a big bit of just knowing that kids are an absolute gift from God. That we don't have control over it, they're a blessing, but also within that to know that we are not promised. We're not promised them. We're not entitled to them, which is a hard thing to know, to grasp, I suppose. But
When I think as we think about this story of Hannah and why it connects so much to us is there's a sense of her pouring out her grief, so much so that Eli thought she was drunk. And he came out at the temple and he's like, there's a drunk woman in front of the temple, and in essence scolds her. And she says, no, I am not drunk. This is the bitterness of my soul. And in that grief, Eli comforts her and blesses her in that moment. And she goes back and gives birth to Samuel, and then fulfills her vow of surrendering Samuel back to the temple in verse 27 of chapter 1. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord. And I know this has been really special for you, having children and receiving them, but I think that the lesson you often talk about is they are a gift, and that they are committed to him. And so what does it mean to really commit our children to the Lord for those of us that have them?
I think that's such a process of learning it, recommitting them daily to the Lord. There's a book that I've gone back to a lot. It's Paul Tripp parenting book, and it's just completely like gospel centered. It's one of the ways in which that he like kind of lays that out is that he looks at ownership over being an ambassador. Do we own our kids? Do we? This is a quote from his book. Ownership parenting is motivated and shaped by parents' want for their children and from their children. It is driven by a vision of what we want our children to be and what we want our children to give us in return. But yet, someone who wants to be an ambassador, they want to faithfully represent the message, methods, and character of the leader who has sent him. He is not free to think, speak, or act independently. And I think for us to grasp that, being an ambassador for Christ to our children is huge.
Yeah, it's good.
So I try to cling to that and remember that.
Yeah. And I love how Hannah's story kind of continues on through the lineage of Samuel. And it's really cool that God gives her Samuel. She surrenders Samuel back to the temple service. And Eli continues to bless them, and God continues to bless them. She ends up having 3 more sons and 2 daughters after Samuel was born. And I love just her trust in God and her faith in God in an unknown future. And so as we wrap this up, do you have any encouragement for anyone watching today? What would you say to them?
Yeah, just know that you're not on your own. Whether you have kids and maybe things are a struggle at home, maybe you just have difficult kids, maybe you have kids that are awesome, maybe you can't have kids at all, know that you're not on your own. You have a church community that loves you, that wants to walk alongside you. Sometimes it may mean that you need to seek people out. People don't necessarily always know what's going on with everyone. And so we want to love you, we want to care for you. If you need people to talk to, there's lots of women in our church that would love to talk to you. So yeah, just know that you're not on your own, that we're here, that it's a journey.
So I want to encourage you guys. We love you. Happy Mother's Day, and just continue to encourage you to lean into the Lord, pour out your heart to the Lord, and then receive from Him His word, His truth, His promises, and He will see you through whatever season you find yourself in. Love you guys. Have a great day.
Hey, good morning, church. Some of you guys might recognize me, some of you guys might not. My name is Aaron. I'm the worship leader at New Philly, and I have to say, despite the fact that we've had to be apart in the past couple months, I've actually enjoyed getting to work on all these worship songs that we do each week, that we get to sing together. I think it's a really cool thing that we get to do every Sunday, and this week I kind of wanted to do something a little different. Something that I've kind of always wanted to do. I love hymns. I think hymns are awesome. I think that The Love of God, that song specifically, is amazing, and I think it's some of the most poetic and beautiful sounding words that we sing, describing the Lord as a church. And I think I love that song. And I think something I've always kind of wanted to do with a song like that was add maybe a section or a part where the language is a little bit more like how I would pray to the Lord right now, and how I would approach Him, just to make it like just a touch more personal. And that's what I did this week. I kind of worked on a little part that we can add to the love of God, that we can sing together as a body. And it goes like this. It's 4 lines. It's, you wrapped me in your love from the beginning. An erring child, you gave the grace I needed. Oh, hide me in the refuge of your shadow. Beneath your wings, I find a love I can believe in. And I think with those 4 lines, there's 2 big thoughts that come through for me. I think the first one is just that despite the fact that I deserve nothing, and I still deserve nothing, the Lord has given me everything. He's been gracious, He's been loving, and He sought me out despite the fact that I have nothing. I have nothing to offer Him. And that alone is amazing. That's like enough to write a whole song about. But the other thing that I was thinking about while writing this part was the second 2 lines, and that's that the Lord's love is the only love that is fulfilling. It's the only love that I can trust in. It's the only love that I can believe in. And I think that's a super hard thing for me to come to grips with sometimes, but it's the truth. The only true love comes from Jesus Christ. And these words mean a lot to me. I hope they mean something to you. Let's sing them together as a body.
Ocean your love from the beginning. Entering child, you gave the grace I needed. Oh, hide me in the refuge of your shadow. Beneath your wings I find a love I can believe in. 'Cause you've wrapped me in your love from the beginning. Entering child, you gave the grace I needed. Oh, hide me in the refuge of your shadow. Beneath your wings I find a love I can believe in. 'Cause you've wrapped me in your love from the beginning. Entering child, you gave the grace I needed. Oh, hide me in the refuge of your shadow. Beneath your wings I find a love I can believe in. Oh, teach me of a love I can believe in. Oh, teach me of your love. Oh, love of God, oh, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong. It shall forevermore endure. The saints and angels